Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. It takes us a little time to readjust to our new location. Okay, we have been studying this chapter in the book on mastering the mind. And we had come as far as the section on the 5 hindrances. And now we come to the next section of the book. This begins on page 273. And this is called the Refinement of the Mind. And this section deals with a common experience in the methodical and long-term practice of meditation. And that is the experience of how the mind gradually becomes more and more refined, and different levels of defilements come up and then have to be worked through and eliminated. And the Buddha begins by bringing in a simile to illustrate this process. Actually, there are certain differences in the way that the Buddha, or anyway the Buddha's text, presents the Buddha's teaching in regard to similes. The most common way is for the Buddha first to state his point, the doctrinal point relating to practice, then bring in a simile, and then say in the same way, and then repeat the doctrinal point. But sometimes the Buddha, or at least the text, begins straight away with the simile, and then fills in the simile by bringing in the doctrinal point. And that is the method that is used in this particular sutta. So the sutta begins straight away by taking the simile of a goldsmith purifying a piece of gold ore. And I find it interesting how it seems that the Buddha must have been familiar with the process of refining gold, so one thinks that he would have had very little life experience in that as a prince, but somehow through his personal observation he became acquainted with the different stages in purifying gold. Okay, so he speaks about how a goldsmith first pours the rough gold into a trowel, washes and cleans it. Okay, when he does this, those remove the gross impurities from the gold. Then there are moderate impurities, grit and sand, and so the goldsmith has to wash, rinse and clean the rough gold again. And then when he has done this, then there still remain minute impurities in the gold. These are fine sand and black dust, and so the goldsmith has to repeat the washing, and after that only the pure gold dust remains. So then the goldsmith then pours this gold into a melting pot, smelts it and melts it. But he doesn't take it out from the vessel as long as there's still some dross, some impurity in the gold. And the reason he doesn't do this, if he were to remove it out, to take it out, then the gold would still be brittle and not easily molded. Okay, but after some time of smelting and melting the gold, then there comes a time when all of the impurities are removed, and then the gold is thoroughly smelted, and so now the gold will be pliant, workable, and it can be used to make any kind of ornament that is made out of gold. So now the goldsmith can take that gold and use it to make a diadem, earrings, a necklace, a golden chain, or any other ornament. I have absolutely no experience with smelting and molding gold, so I can't say whether all of this description is correct or not. Okay, but now the Buddha applies this simile to the process of training the mind. And he does so, he says it's similar with a monk who is devoted to the training in the higher mind. The training in the mind is called adhicitta sika. So this is an important term, so I'll write it. The ordinary word for mind in Buddhist text is citta. This is very common, very basic word, which we meet countless times in the text. But then a prefix, adi, is added to it. The prefix adi gives the sense of higher or superior, and this means a mind which has been elevated to the level of samadhi. If you would like to sit up here, there's another seat right here. Okay, so the adhicitta is the mind which has been elevated to the level of samadhi, particularly the mind of the jhanas. And so now the Buddha is going to describe the different obstacles or impurities that have to be worked through in order to reach this purified mind, this elevated mind that's suitable for attaining the jhanas. Okay, so first there come what are called the gross impurities, which are like the gross impurities of gold. But this is bad conduct or misconduct of body, speech, and mind. And here by the impurities of mind would mean very heavy and gross impure states, like extremely strong craving and extremely strong persistent ill will. Okay, so now this monk who's in training, or we could say anybody who's undertaking this training, abandons, dispels, eliminates, and abolishes these gross impurities. And that is done by adopting the principles of good conduct of body, speech, and mind, especially for bodily action, not killing, not stealing, not sexual misconduct. For the case of a monastic, observing brahmacharya, celibacy, avoiding misconduct of speech, lying, slander, harsh speech, and just idle chatter. And for purifying the mind at this gross level, avoiding these strong states of craving and anger and ill will, and having a right view, at least the right view of the law of cause and effect with regard to action, the law of karma. Okay, so when one adopts these principles of good conduct, of body, speech, and mind, this will help provide a basis for the cultivation of the mind. Do we have another seat at the table? Or? Of course, right there. Okay, observing the principles of good, righteous conduct, this is a basis for the development of the mind. The reason for this is because all of our actions, whether bodily actions, verbal actions, thoughts, all originate from the mind itself. So if we are to cultivate the mind, we have to eliminate the coarsest, heaviest expression of unwholesome states of mind, which occur particularly through bodily and verbal actions. And then we have to exercise some control over the mind in our day-to-day life so that we're not overrun by or overcome by strong craving and strong anger and ill will. Okay, do you have it? Okay. Okay, now once one is observing the principles of good conduct as one is meditating, then there arise other types of unwholesome thoughts, subtler types of unwholesome thoughts, and these are here classified into the three types of unwholesome thoughts. That is, thoughts of sensual pleasure or sensual thoughts, thoughts of ill will, and thoughts of harming. Okay, in sensual thoughts, thoughts of ill will, we have the first two factors in a familiar group. What is that group? Everybody should know the answer. Right. They're the first two of the five hindrances. So those I understand to be amongst the five hindrances. I divide them into two classes, two groups. The first two hindrances, craving for sensual pleasures, sensual desire, and ill will, those are the gross or coarse hindrances. Then the other three hindrances, dullness and drowsiness, restlessness and remorse and doubt, those are subtler hindrances. It strikes me, I have to admit, a little bit strange that thoughts of harming is included as a subtler hindrance, and along with sensual thought and thought of ill will. Because it would seem that an actual thought of harming another living being is a rather gross type of unwholesome thought. But I think the reason for this is that in the Noble Eightfold Path, the Buddha has defined right thought or right intention as the thought of desirelessness or renunciation of sense pleasures, the thought of non-ill will, and the thought of non-harming. So non-harming then becomes very important as a basic motivation in one's life in order to follow the Noble Eightfold Path. And in India, during the Buddha's time, there was a strong tendency amongst the different ascetic groups to emphasize non-harming as a principle of the spiritual life. We see this particularly, the ones who carried this to the furthest extreme were the Jains. So the Jain ascetics, they go about naked, or at least one group of them naked, because they don't want to wear clothes in the belief that clothes are harmful to living beings. And then the Jain ascetics, even those who wear the white robes, will wear a white cloth, a very thin white cloth over their mouth, so that they don't breathe in any living beings, any flying living beings, or any minute living beings. And they're very scrupulous about using water. They won't drink cold water with the idea that they might be drinking some living being. And so this idea of non-harming was common to all of the different ascetic groups in the Buddha's time. And the Buddha made this also a fundamental principle of his own teaching, because it's in accord with the principles or the guidelines of loving kindness and compassion. So he didn't lay down such strict rules as were observed by the Jains and some of the other groups. Okay, so sensual thoughts, thoughts of ill will, thoughts of harming might arise, and then one has to work to abandon, dispel, and eliminate them. There are different methods for overcoming these unwholesome thoughts. I will actually come to the methods of dealing with these disturbing thoughts in the next section that we'll be discussing today. Okay, once one overcomes these subtler unwholesome thoughts, these second level unwholesome thoughts, then there come the very subtle unwholesome thoughts, the very subtle impurities. These are described as thoughts about one's relatives, about one's home country, and about one's reputation. Maybe these are laid down particularly in the case of a monastic person, because a monastic person gives up the family in order to lead a life of homeless wandering. And so, as he's practicing meditation, then there can come thoughts about the family that he's left behind, his parents, brothers, sisters, sometimes it could be wife and children, and then those thoughts will be nagging on the mind. Maybe even those thoughts will be trying to incite the monk to disrobe and return to his family. Even the Buddha, it said that on the night of his enlightenment, as he was meditating under the Bodhi tree, then there would appear to him images of his wife and his child, his weeping father and his stepmother, and this is the work of Mara trying to induce the Buddha to give up his striving for enlightenment and to return to the family life. And so there come thoughts about the relatives, thoughts about one's home country, since again in India during the Buddha's time, when one becomes a monk, one travels often with the Buddha from place to place throughout northern India, and one is left behind one's native village, one's town, and personal relationships in an Indian society, like Sri Lankan society, they're very, very close-knit. It's not like America, not in America, where maybe you're born and grow up in New York, then when you reach adult years, you might move out to California, and you still have family spread out in New York, New Jersey, and you can communicate with them by telephone, by letter, by email. In the Buddha's time, when you leave your home country, you leave all of your friends behind, no way to communicate with anybody. It's only sometimes as the Buddha is wandering, perhaps he'll come close to your home village, and then everybody will come out to see you. But otherwise, no computers, no email, no telephones, no letters. Okay, and then the third, it's a rather unusual word which is given here, anavanyu, which means literally not being condemned, not being despised. I guess this is concern for one's reputation, concern to be respected, liked, and admired by others. So we should understand that these are just samples of the types of very subtle, disturbing thoughts that could arise. Actually, from my own experience, there can be thousands of different types of very subtle, disturbing thoughts. And these thoughts one has to overcome just by persisting with one's meditation subject, or sometimes switching to another subject, which will be more effective in dealing with that particular barrier. Okay, then when one overcomes these very subtle thoughts, then there remain, here the expression is given Dhamma Vitakka, which means it's difficult to know exactly how to translate this. Here I think I translated it, I think this is my own translation, thoughts about the teaching. But the Pali is Dhamma Vitakka. So the word Dhamma, of course, means the Buddha's teaching. At least it's one of its meanings. And so Dhamma Vitakka could be thoughts about the Dhamma. But the word Dhamma also has a very comprehensive meaning of meaning any kind of mental object. Any mental object is called a Dhamma. So Dhamma Vitakka could also be thoughts about any kind of subtle mental objects which arise and just pull the mind away from the meditation subject. It just struck me just now that if we take these 3 paragraphs about the different mental obstructions to the development of meditation, we take in the first paragraph, we could take sensual thoughts and thoughts of ill will and correlate these with the first 2 hindrances, the hindrance of sensual desire, the hindrance of ill will. Then, this is just my speculation, we could take the next paragraph, the subtle impurities, thoughts about one's relatives, home country and reputation. These would be kinds of restless thoughts. So we could take this and correlate this with the hindrance of restlessness. And maybe broadly we might bring in drowsiness too. So this could be connected with the second 2 hindrances, drowsiness and restlessness. And then if Dhamma Vitakka is taken to mean thoughts about the teaching, this could be correlated with the hindrance of doubt. Okay, then continuing, the text says that concentration is not yet peaceful and sublime. It has not attained to full tranquility, nor has it achieved mental unification, but it is maintained by strenuous suppression of the defilements. It seems to me, again this is my conjecture, that the text should have said that something is missing here. The text should have said, when he has abandoned these, there still remain thoughts about the teaching. And then the text should have said, such thoughts an earnest, capable monk abandons, dispels, eliminates, and abolishes. And then it should say, that concentration is not yet peaceful and sublime. In other words, after one has eliminated even these subtle thoughts about the teaching, one gains samadhi, one gains a kind of concentration. How is the sound back there? Are you getting a kind of metallic resonance? Is it disturbing, or can you?
Seems to be okay when the microphone's on the table.
Yeah.
Maybe
I should just put it back on the table. Yeah, this is all right. It's amplifying the sound sufficiently. Okay, so it seems to me that one eliminates those thoughts about the teaching, and then that concentration. It seems to have a particular affection for my hand. Okay, so after eliminating these thoughts about the teaching, then one gains a samadhi, one gains concentration. But it is this concentration that's not yet peaceful and sublime. It's not fully tranquil. It hasn't really reached the level of full mental unification, but it's maintained by there's a certain degree of tension in the mind, a certain forcefulness in suppressing the defilement. But then, when one reaches that stage, what one has to do is loosen or soften up the mind. Actually, this is the advice that I would give in every stage of developing concentration. Samadhi is always to keep the mind very softly on the object, not pushing the mind onto the object, but letting the mind just, I would say, almost sit down on the object as though the object were a cushion, or as if the object were a pillow and one was lying with one's head on the object. But still, as one is working to overcome these defilements, to eliminate these disturbing thoughts, they can be, even after one gains some degree of samadhi or concentration, a certain forcefulness in that samadhi. One has gained it through applying strong energy. And so the factor of energy and the factor of concentration or samadhi are not yet properly balanced. And so what one has to do is sort of step back or lower the energy level and let the mind become softer, gentler, more delicately placed on the object. Okay, as one does that, then the text says, there comes a time when his mind is inwardly steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated. And then that concentration is then calm and refined. It has attained to full tranquility and achieved mental unification. And this is the important phrase. It is not maintained by strenuous suppression of the defilements. The defilements are suppressed, they're overcome tentatively, but there's no tension in the mind. It's not a strenuous suppression, but just a very natural, open freedom from the defilements. Okay, and I think this state that's described here will correspond to the full jhana. So the text doesn't actually specify the jhanas, but we could understand that this very calm, refined concentration, this is the concentration of the jhanas. And then using that calm concentration, the monk will bring the level of samadhi through to the fourth jhana. So here all four jhanas are implied. And how do we know that they're implied? Because the supernormal powers are going to be mentioned. And these supernormal powers all depend on mastery of the fourth jhana. Okay, so then the text continues. When one reaches the state of calm concentration, then whatever state can be realized by direct knowledge, one directs one's mind to that state, and then one is capable of realizing or experiencing that state by direct knowledge whenever the appropriate conditions of change. Okay, when one gains the fourth jhana and then gains mastery of it, if one wants to be able to realize the direct knowledges, including these supernormal powers, is that clacking sound? Is it coming from?
You may still want to experience to remove all the mental objects to the other side.
Or it could be the proximity of these mental objects.
Usually that's the reason why you
This one?
have all the mental objects.
That's metal.
Okay, let us. Okay, it seems to be okay.
The recorders also. Could be static also.
Okay, now they say if one wants to exercise these supernormal powers, certain kind of methodology is laid out in the VIII, which is designed to develop extraordinary skill in samadhi, the power of the mind. So it's not sufficient to gain just the fourth jhana, but one has to then go on to gain all 8 meditative attainments, including the base of infinite space, the base of infinite consciousness, the base of nothingness, the base of neither perception nor non-perception. Then one has to train the mind to go through all of the 4 jhanas, then the 4 formless attainments, to go through them very quickly with different objects. Then one has to train the mind to go backwards through the 8 attainments, from the base of neither perception nor non-perception, to the base of nothingness, to the base of infinite space. I think got it wrong. The base of infinite consciousness, the base of infinite space, then 4th jhana, 3rd jhana, 2nd jhana, 1st jhana. Then one has to go through skipping one attainment and going on to every other attainment. 1st jhana, 3rd jhana, base of infinite space, base of nothingness, then backwards, then 2nd jhana, 4th jhana, base of infinite consciousness, base of neither perception nor non-perception, then backwards. And so, as one does this, it's a training that increases the power, the flexibility, the malleability of the mind. And after one has gone through that preliminary training, then one becomes capable of exercising these spiritual powers, the idis, so that even with one's single body here, one could project one's body many different places at the same time. Doesn't have to depend on television or YouTube to do that, but one just does it naturally. There are other powers described here. The only one that I have personal experience of is traveling through the sky like a bird while seated cross-legged. When one is sitting in economy class, sometimes there's not much leg room. So it's easiest just to fold one's legs crosswise. I can tell myself I'm traveling through the sky like a bird. Okay, you can read the different spiritual powers on your own, but the one which is most important for the Buddha's teaching is the last one. That is the destruction of the taints, the destruction of these are the asavas. So one makes this determination By the destruction of the taints, may I in this very life enter and dwell in the taintless liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom, realizing it for myself with direct knowledge. And then with the power of this well-developed mind, then one directs the mind to the development of insight, vipassana. And then the insight knowledges become very clear, very sharp, very powerful, and one should carry them through to the attainment, to the eradication of all of the defilements, right at the root level, and then one attains this liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom. I'll put these two words on the board, they're very important. It's actually the taintless liberation of mind. In the Buddha's teaching, we come across the expression Ceto Vimutti, liberation of mind, very often. But there are different types of liberation of mind, and most of them are not permanent liberation of mind. So when one gains, say, the fourth jhana, we can call this a type of Ceto Vimutti. It's a liberation of mind, in that the mind is now free from all kinds of disturbing thoughts. And it's very peaceful, very tranquil, but it's not a permanent liberation. When one practices the loving kindness meditation, this is the metta, or karuna, any of the four Brahma Viharas, they lead to a kind of Ceto Vimutti, a liberation of mind. So that in the sutras we find the expression metta Ceto Vimutti, the liberation of mind through loving kindness. Karuna Ceto Vimutti, liberation of mind through compassion. So these are liberations of mind, and that the mind is freed temporarily from all of the defilements. It's very bright, radiant, blissful, but it's not a final, permanent liberation. Some people mistake it for that. I remember there's Professor Richard Gumbridge from Oxford University. He wrote a book called How Buddhism Began in, I think, about 1997, 98, in which he interpreted the expression liberation of mind through loving kindness, Ceto Vimutti, metta Ceto Vimutti, to mean that just by practicing the meditation on loving kindness one could achieve nirvana. And then I wrote the book review of that book, and then I criticized him on that point. And then he gave a lecture, I think, to the Pali Text Society, in which he mentioned my criticism. And he said, one very conservative monk, Western monk in Sri Lanka, has criticized me on that point, but then he tried to defend himself against my criticism. But then I read the text of that lecture. I don't remember whether he sent it to me or not, but then I compiled all of the passages, or at least a number of passages from the sutras, in which the Buddha speaks about the liberation of mind through loving kindness, but then goes on to say that attainment does not lead to nirvana, to enlightenment, to nirvana. It's still an imperfect attainment. And then I sent these passages to him and never got a reply. Okay, so then we have also the attainment, the formless attainment, can be considered a type of liberation. It's a liberation from form, from material form, from matter. But it's not a permanent liberation. And the reason why these liberations of mind are not permanent is because they're not accompanied by wisdom. They're not fulfilled by wisdom. But it's when wisdom is developed to the fullest level, the level where it can bring about the eradication of the defilements, then one gains what is called the taintless liberation of mind, which is also a liberation by wisdom. And that is the perfect, it's also called the unshakable liberation of mind, the liberation of mind that can never fall away. Okay, maybe at this point I'll pause and ask whether anybody has any questions on this passage, on this text. Yes, please.
I'm curious about the simile of the goldsmith and the idea of the final result is creating these sort of superfluous ornaments.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about that as a comparison to the attainment of the mind.
Yeah.
It seems to me somehow, I understand the process of getting there, but I'm not understanding the significance of the final result.
I mean, because the gold ornaments seem to be like worldly?
Yeah,
exactly.
Well,
it's just a comparison. One shouldn't read too much into it. It's just a simile used to show how gold is gradually purified of these corruptions or impurities, and then when it becomes fully pure, one could use it to make any ornament that one wants.
It's so pliable.
Yeah. And similarly, the mind, when it's cleared of the hindrances and disturbing thoughts, then it becomes so pliable, so malleable that one could use it to attain any of these superior attainments. And these superior attainments are like in the spiritual sphere, they're like the ornaments in the mundane sphere. Yes, sir.
The final section about the
Yeah, I could actually hear the voices quite well. Anyway, it might be good for the whole person.
The final section on the taintless liberation of mind. Can you help? Okay. Compared with, on page 249, when the simile of talking about the footprint.
Right. Yeah.
And there was a similar passage, but then he said, even that you don't say that you know
Okay. Yeah.
that the Buddha is the perfect enlightened. And then there's another step.
Right. Yeah. Okay, let's just take a look at that. This is page 249, it's paragraph 25 and 26. Okay, it's 26. No, it's actually 25 where it says that the mind that he doesn't yet come to the conclusion. Right. It's in 26 that he draws the conclusion.
Right.
Right?
Right, yeah. So in 25 it's, in 26 it says, the mind is liberated from the chain of sensual desire, comes to the knowledge that is liberated, he understands no more communication. But the paragraph 25 said they've already said that he understands that these are the taints, the origin of the taints, the spirit of the taints, and that's still a footprint.
Right. Yeah.
Here's the next step. I can kind of draw a parallel between that and
right. Okay.
If there seem to be more compressed in the current.
In the one that we've read, it's more compressed.
Yes.
In this one, the simile of the elephant's footprint. In paragraph 25, what we have is the stage where one is still developing the insight into, here, the Four Noble Truths, the nature of reality, in order to eliminate the taints or defilements. But one has not yet completed the process of insight or understanding. And so for that reason it says that this is called a footprint of the Tathagata, something scraped by the Tathagata, something marked by the Tathagata. But a noble disciple still has not yet come to the conclusion that the Blessed One is perfectly enlightened, the Dhamma is well expounded, the Sangha is practicing the good ways. Rather, he is in the process of coming to this conclusion. That is because he's still undergoing these insights. But the process of insight knowledge has not yet come to its consummation. But then it's in paragraph 26, this states that as he's knowing and seeing this, that is, as the insight has become sufficiently deep and clear, then the mind becomes liberated from each of the taints, and then when it's liberated there comes the knowledge of liberation, and at that point the text says the noble disciple comes to the conclusion the Buddha is perfectly enlightened, and so on.
So in paragraph 25 it's more a description that he sees the origin of taints and the sensation of taints, but he doesn't really completely has a direct knowledge of that process.
He hasn't, through the direct knowledge of the taints, he hasn't yet completely eliminated them. He's still in the process of eliminating them. On page 275, it just states that attainment much more concisely. Any additional questions?
It's the unshakable mind.
Unshakable liberation of mind, yeah.
Unshakable liberation of the mind.
Yeah.
Is it the mind or is it the nature of the mind? Or we call it mind. Or we call it wisdom. Or whatever we call it.
Well, the mind is the subject, but this is what's referred to as the unshakable liberation of the mind. So this is the mind which has been liberated from the taints, all the defilements, and in that state of liberation it becomes unshakable. It can never be knocked down again. There are no more defilements which could pull the mind away from that state of liberation.
And that state is still called the mind?
Still call it the mind, yes.
Who calls the mind?
Excuse me?
Who calls it the mind? I call it the mind. I myself call it the mind.
I don't understand the question. The text speaks of it as liberation of mind. Yes, Katie.
This is not based on the text. This is just sort of a follow-up question to her question, which is, after the mind is in an unshakable state, if all things change and there is no mind, there's no entity with a real foundation, what is the next degradation or the next metamorphosis of the unshakable mind? Or do we know that because it's beyond humanity? Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I'm not quite sure that I get to your question.
The unshakable mind that develops through all of this work, through passage through the influxes. Once one achieves nothing, the mind's in a light nowhere. Even the unshakable mind is not a permanent state, otherwise we would be entering back into the argument of something has fundamental existence. And the teaching of Buddhism is nothing has fundamental existence, nothing has intrinsic value. So what is the next stage? There is no mind. There's an unshakable mind. There's a nature of unshakable mind.
Okay, now I think I understand.
Degradation of that even.
Yeah. Okay, first, the mind which is said to be unshakable. This is using a somewhat, you call this a conventional terminology. Actually, the mind itself is always changing. It's a process of constant change. It's not a lasting, substantial entity. But within the stream of mind, all of the defilements have been eradicated. Even the anusaya, which means the subtle, latent tendency of defilements, have been eradicated. So there's no possibility anymore of, within that stream of mind, there's no possibility for that stream of mind to again fall into the grip of the defilement. It's permanently purified in that sense. It's unshakable in that sense. So it's not unshakable in the sense that there's one entity which we could seize upon and say, this entity is the mind, and this is something which is a lasting entity, and remains as a substantial purified entity. So it's actually the stream of consciousness which is now permanently purified. And then is your question, what happens when that comes to an end?
It's silly because it's like, swirl, what next? And I haven't even begun to carry this through. But it is sort of a curiosity if Buddhism then answers, which is way beyond, so far down the line, what happens, what's the transformation of that mind, or is it just beyond our humanity?
I think we come to this later in the book, so perhaps I don't want to discuss too much in advance.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Yes, Yvonne? Okay.
I'm a little bit confused because I feel that when I look at my reactions, despite having sat forever now, I feel, and worked on myself, I feel that when it comes to right view, when I'm under attack, the instincts are pretty much the same. And is it by the suppression of those instincts at that point and bringing reason in that one can sort of channel the mind to a right view at that point? I mean, the simile of the saw, in a sense, that, even if you are being hurt, at that point, you do metta, and for the person who is hurting, and at that point you start, besides metta, you kind of bring in reason, because what they're doing wouldn't be done if they were seeing. So it's a practice question that I'm asking.
Okay, but maybe let us hold with that question, because I think the next passage that we'll be reading might be relevant to that. If it isn't, then bring up the question again.
Yeah, actually, first I just want to comment on the insatiable mind, because I saw abundance the insatiable liberation.
I said unshakable liberation.
Mind.
Yeah.
And my question is about the thought about Dhamma.
Yeah.
I thought that this simile, or this sutta is describing, first of all, the gradual refinement of the mind. So therefore, up to that point, it's still about getting concentration somehow. So how can we, at that point, one needs to have no doubt about Dhamma, about the teaching? Wouldn't that come after we develop insight?
The way I would understand it is that these would be the kind of doubts that obstruct one from practicing the way leading to samadhi. These are not the doubts about the truth of the teaching itself. Though also such doubts could arise and they could become a cause of discouragement. But I think, let us say that states of doubt will come up and then they will preoccupy the mind so that one can't focus on the meditation subject. And then those doubts will be temporarily overcome. One has to use methods to overcome them temporarily through the practice of samadhi. But the doubts themselves, insofar as they pertain to the fundamentals of the teaching, they won't be eliminated until the attainment of wisdom until wisdom is attained and wisdom is perfected.
Does this Dhamma refer to the Buddha's teaching, the Buddha's Dhamma, or any teaching? because a non-Buddhist can also attain Dharma. Therefore, it doesn't, logic would say that it doesn't have to be the Buddha's teaching. And plus, the note said, the end note said that commentary says the Dharma refers to 10 corruptions of insight. What kind of insight? Is this Buddha insight?
First, I don't really agree with the commentary on this point. Okay, it's true that anybody who practices can attain the jhanas is not restricted to the Buddha's teaching. Here the text just uses this expression, Dhamma Vitakka, which is a very unusual expression. It doesn't occur, I don't think it occurs anywhere else in the text. And so there's a matter of some uncertainty exactly what it's referring to. But I could take it to be, as I explained, either doubts about the Buddha's teaching, which are preoccupying the mind, or or it could be not doubt at all, but just intellectual reflections on the teaching. Or it could be thoughts about, as I said, any kind of random objects that arise, and then those are covered by the word Dhamma. Yes, Katie.
I just wanted to short and sweet on it, or short and to the point on it, which is whether we're talking about liberation of mind liberation, or unshakable liberation of mind, or unshakable mind, it's still setting up the idea that mind is some sort of, what it can be tricky if one starts thinking of mind as a fundamental thing. It has a degradation, and we know that because we have a limited period of time within our lifetime with which to use the mind to heal the mind, but Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, brain damage can destroy that material object of mind. So whether it's an unshakable liberation of mind or an unshakable mind, it's the same thing. There's no fundamental mind, if I understand the Buddhist correctly. And that's the thing I use when I read this section, which is not to think that I'm training the ultimate object, the mind. I'm training something that has a short span to help me help itself. That too will pass.
But we also have to remember this. I mean, this is something fundamental to the Buddha's teaching, that mind is not limited to one lifetime. So the citta, even though citta is always changing, but this, what we call the continuum of the citta, the continuity of it, will continue beyond this lifetime, on to the next life and life after life after life. And so though there's no fixed entity that we call the citta is something changing and process, but this process of citta goes on. It's been going on through beginningless time, and then it continues on into the indefinite future. And it occurred to me just now, the text do use the expression unshakable mind for the mind that's been fully liberated. And then they also call it unshakable liberation of mind. So one gets both expressions. Okay, I think I should go on to the next text. This is a text or a sutta on the removal of distracting thoughts. And so this...
Just thinking about our discussion, the removal of distracting thoughts. The removal of distracting thoughts seems very pertinent.
It's irrelevant to the discussion. Okay. Okay, so this discourse is also concerned with the development of adhicitta, the higher mind. This is the mind of samadhi, of concentration. It's not directly concerned with the attainment of liberation. Okay, and so it says when a monk is pursuing the higher mind, from time to time he should give attention to 5, the text uses a troubling word here. The word is nimitta, which is often translated as signs. And sometimes the word nimitta in later Buddhist literature is used to mean a special kind of object of meditation that appears when the mind becomes very quiet and well concentrated. Then there arises sometimes it's like a circle of light, a ball of light, a point of light. And the text like the Visuddhimagga refer to that as the nimitta. But in the very early Buddhist texts, the Discourses of the Buddha, we don't find the word nimitta in that sense. And here the word nimitta seems to be used just in a very general sense as referring to maybe five different methods that should be used in dealing with distracting thoughts. I think that brings out the sense most clearly. Okay, so here, when a monk is giving attention to some sign, again we have this word nimitta used in a somewhat different sense. And here the word nimitta seems to be referring to any kind of object of meditation. It's not being used in that sense of the later literature, of that ball of light or point of light that appears, but any kind of object to which one is attending. So if one is practicing mindfulness of breathing, then the breath will be one's sign. If one is doing recollection of the Buddha, then the qualities of the Buddha will be one sign. If one is attending to the sensations in the body, the sensations will be one sign. Okay, but as one is attending to that sign, to that object, then it says, owing to that sign, there arise in him evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, hatred, and delusion. Here I think one has to interpret the text a little freely. Like if one takes the breath as one's object, I would find it difficult to understand how, owing to the breath as the object, there will arise evil, unwholesome thoughts. If one is attending to, say, an image of the Buddha as the object, I don't see how one could say from that object, the image of the Buddha, there arise evil, unwholesome thoughts. If one is attending to sensations in the body, I don't see how one could say that from that object there will arise evil, unwholesome thoughts. But rather, the way I would understand this, again using a somewhat free interpretation, as one is attending to one's primary object, then through some other causes, like just deep-rooted tendencies, or could be something one has seen, some event that's happened recently, that suddenly these thoughts referring to that event come into the mind, and so there arise these unwholesome thoughts. And then these unwholesome thoughts, what is distinctive of them? They're connected with desire, hatred, and delusion. And we can take these three terms, desire, hatred, and delusion, and see them as a way of classifying the five hindrances. Because the five hindrances are the main set of factors that are obstacles to the development of meditation. And so desire, we connect with thoughts of sensual desire. Hatred, thoughts of hatred will be thoughts that are based on ill will, thoughts rooted in ill will. And then delusion would generally cover the other three hindrances: drowsiness, or dullness and drowsiness, restlessness, and doubt. And so the text says, when there arise in him, the meditating monk, evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, hatred, and delusion, then he should give attention to some other sign, to some other object connected with what is wholesome. I'm always hesitant to take a different perspective
than that which is advocated by the text. But the way I understand the practice of mental development, when one has a primary object, say mindfulness of breathing, and then some kind of disturbing thoughts come up, say connected with desire, sensual desire, hatred, ill will, restlessness, drowsiness, doubt, one should not immediately lay that main object aside and then turn the mind to some other object. And so I would reorganize the sequence of set of 5 methods that are taught and say that when disturbing thoughts come up, one doesn't immediately lay one's primary object aside and turn to some other object, but rather one just briefly makes note of this disturbing thought and then gently turns the mind away from it and lets the mind settle back on the primary object. And so one should work as consistently as possible, continuously and consistently as possible with the primary object, not immediately turning to some other object. But if these unwholesome thoughts, disturbing thoughts, become persistent, overwhelming, overpowering, obsessive, and one is unable to focus on the main object, the primary object, then one could temporarily lay the primary object aside and then focus or turn the mind to some other object or some other theme of meditation which is directly connected, which is a direct antidote to the unwholesome thoughts. Also, if one finds that particular unwholesome thoughts are persisting, strong and persisting traits in one's character, then instead of using something like a clear, opaque object like mindfulness of breathing or attention to sensation, one could use a meditation method which is directly opposed to that particular mental state, that defilement which is an obstacle, which is a persistent obstacle to one's practice. And so what's usually recommended is for thoughts, obsessive thoughts of sensual desire, the direct antidote to that is what is called Asupa Sanya. I write that on the board. Asupa Sanya means the attention, or literally it's the perception of the unattractive nature of the body, the non-beautiful nature of the body. Because what is meant by the sensual thoughts, they're usually thoughts of sexual desire. And thoughts of sexual desire arise because of the perception of the body of another person as being beautiful. I mean, that's part of biological nature. We're conditioned in that way in order to continue the species. And so to overcome the sensual desire, what one does is to focus very closely on the non-beautiful, the unattractive, or even to call it the repulsive nature of the body when examined closely. And so what would be recommended to the monks in the Buddha's time is to go to the carnal grounds where bodies are thrown out into a field, and then birds like crows come to peck on them and open up the body so that one could see the different parts of the body. And the Buddha has organized this practice into a systematic method of meditation which involves first focusing on the outside of the body. Because when we become attracted to another person, we have a visual impression of the body, and that body strikes us as being beautiful and attractive. So what does one do is, at the first stage, one simply focuses or takes up the question, what is it that one actually sees when one perceives another person? One perceives 5 things. There's only 5 things that one sees. Head is the hair. It could be bodily hairs. Fingernails, teeth, if the person smiles or opens the mouth, and skin. Is there anything else that one sees but those 5 things? Okay, then one considers each of them individually. The man sees the woman, the girl with the long, flowing blonde hair, black hair. Pull out a few individual hairs, put them on the table, and then would ask, what's so beautiful about them? And then they say, if you're in a restaurant and the waiter serves you a bowl of soup, and you look at the soup and there's some hairs in the soup, you call the waiter back and you complain. And the waiter is not going to say, oh, those hairs, they must have come from the woman preparing the soup. She's really beautiful. I'll bring her out here. You look at her, you see how beautiful she is, what beautiful black hair. And that will convince you to drink the soup. No, you complain, you say, I want another bowl of soup. Okay, so head hairs, body hairs, fingernails. Sometimes one looks at the hands, the manicured hands, very beautiful. The women put nail polish on the nails. That's just checking you out. Makes the nails more beautiful. But you really look at them, what are they? Just some kind of hard substance that the body produces and sends out. You clip them. Maybe you collect them into a bowl with clipped fingernails and you present them. They're presented to you. You don't want to accept them. Beautiful teeth, white, shiny teeth, very nice. But the dentist pulls the tooth out and gives it to you, and he says, this is from the beautiful actress, the tooth of the beautiful actress. You don't want to accept it. Okay, and then usually we take the skin, at least the skin must be very beautiful. But if we really just look at the skin close up, there are like medical charts that you can look at, aren't they, that show the skin. There's a layer of the skin with the hair follicles, the different blood vessels leading into the skin to provide them with blood, the layer of fat underneath, that's just part of the skin underneath the surface. So all of this, it's not, when you look at it really close up, not attractive or beautiful. Okay, and that's just the outside of the body. But then when one does the meditation with one's mind's eye, one cuts through the skin, unpeels the skin, and then one sees muscle, nerves, the skeleton, the bones, and then one even, with one's mind's eye, pierces into the bones and takes the bone marrow. And so one examines muscles, nerves, bones, bone marrow. Then one proceeds to the organs of the body, kidneys, heart, liver, diaphragm, spleen, lungs. then one passes to other organs, large intestine, small intestine, stomach, feces, brain. Okay, those are all the solid parts of the body. Then one goes to the fluids, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, then tears, the oil on the skin, synovial fluid, that's the fluid between the bones, snot, spittle, and urine. So all of those are parts of the body. And with one's mind, one attends to each of these parts. One goes through this whole scheme of 32 parts. One goes through it first in direct order, then one goes in reverse order, direct order, reverse order, over and over, focusing on all of these parts until one gets a picture of the real nature of the body. And then one brings all of these parts together, and then one sees the body as a composite whole, and through this one sees that the nature of the body is not really attractive. It's just our distorted perception, which just grasps upon certain features of the body, and then builds up a kind of mental image of the body, and then that becomes the basis of sensual desire. Okay, so that is the specific antidote to sensual desire, which is the meditation on the unattractive nature of the body. And in Buddhist countries, this isn't used only by monks, but even lay people. Also, on special days when they go to the monastery or meditation center, they will practice this meditation. And this is prescribed as the direct antidote to sensual desire. So I've also found another way to deal with both sensual desire and also craving for things like success, material, prosperity, wealth, position, fame. A powerful antidote against that is the meditation on death. And meditation on death is also developed in a systematic way in the Buddhist text. I don't want to explain it in detail here, but the three main themes that occur again and again in the meditation on death, and which are brought together. First is the idea or theme that death is inevitable, that one cannot escape death. Second is the idea or theme that the arrival of death is utterly unpredictable, unknowable in advance. So I can't even be confident that when this class is finished, I might go out and think I'm going up to the cafeteria for the lunch, and then maybe some speed demon is driving down very quickly down the road, and I get hit by the car, and everything's finished. Well, we read, this is really terrible and heartrending about these accounts of these mad people that coming on the university campuses. They come into the campus, the classroom, and just start shooting at students and teachers. And these students and teachers never had the idea that they would never come out of that classroom. They never had the idea that they would not come out of that classroom alive and continue their lives. So one never knows, can never predict the arrival of death. And then the third thing is when death occurs, one has to leave everything behind. One has to leave behind all of one's material possessions, position, status, and so on. One has to leave behind all of one's beloved relatives. One has to leave behind even this body that one identifies as being I and mine. Okay, so one takes these three themes, and one could elaborate on them mentally, explore different aspects of them. And one goes through them again and again, over and over, and then one tries to bring the three of them together into one complex idea, which all three are occurring almost simultaneously. The sense that death can occur, that death is absolutely inescapable, it can occur at any time, and when death occurs, everything has to be eliminated, everything has to be abandoned. And as one develops that theme or that meditation day by day, then it gives a complete sense of detachment or renunciation of everything to which one is attached. But be a little careful with that meditation, that you don't carry it too far too quickly, but sometimes it could lead to states of fear and agitation. Okay, so these are some methods opposed to desire. Then, to overcome hatred and ill will, there is the meditation on loving kindness. The meditation on loving kindness. In the initial stage, we take people representing different relationships to ourselves. It's recommended first, let me say that in the development of loving kindness there are two main components, two main factors. One, at least this is the way I've understood it and practiced it, one is what I call a verbal formula which expresses loving kindness. It can be something like, may so-and-so be well, may so-and-so be happy. That's a very simple formula. A more complex way of elaborating this would be, may so-and-so be well, may they be happy, may they be healthy, may they be peaceful. One could work out one's own formula, anything which you find is congenial to yourself. But maybe at the beginning it's best to keep it fairly simple. So in explaining it, I'll keep it simple. Just may so-and-so be well, may so-and-so be happy. Okay, so on one hand there's the formula, the other are I hate to use the word, but the objects or targets of loving kindness. These are the people to whom one is going to direct the loving kindness. And these fall into different groups determined by their relationship to oneself. And so in developing this, is there a way to turn that off permanently? I so that the call can't come through again.
That's called a phone company.
Okay, so one begins the loving kindness meditation by taking oneself as the object. Because in order to be able to develop loving kindness towards others, one has to have an attitude of friendliness and concern for oneself, for one's own well-being. And so one might visualize one's face, smiling and happy, and then one directs the loving kindness towards oneself. May I be well, may I be happy, or more elaborately, may I be well, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be peaceful, may all my good undertakings succeed, anything like that. And at first, this practice can be, it seems to be artificial, even mechanical, but this is, in developing the loving kindness, it's a process of development. That is, one begins with a mind which can be in a state, an undeveloped state, a mind which might be prone quite often to persistent thoughts of ill will, anger, or sometimes a mind which is just very cool and unfeeling, unsensitive, without much concern for others. But as one practices this, first one develops towards oneself, and then one starts to arouse a feeling of true concern for one's well-being and happiness. Okay, then one passes to other people, and these again fall into groups. Well, I'm continuing with the groups. There will be a person, we call this a respected person. This can be somebody like a teacher, an elder, a benefactor. Then next will be a very close person, a dear friend. Then I elaborate it a little more, or I explained it a little more elaborately than the canonical text or commentarial text. Then one takes a person that I call this an acquaintance. This will be somebody like a neighbor that one has some relationship with, talking, chatting once in a while. It can be a colleague at work that one isn't particularly friendly with, but one just knows as a casual acquaintance. Okay, and then one develops the loving kindness towards the acquaintance. Then one takes a person who is a stranger, somebody that one might see regularly but one has no relationship with. I take as examples a postman who delivers your letters if you see him from time to time. Or it can be a person who works at the gas station where you fill your car with gas. It can be a clerk in a shop where you regularly go shopping. Somebody, you see the person as a face, but normally it's just almost like it could be a machine with a human appearance. You have just no personal relationship apart from saying, hello, how are you, with that individual. And then the last person that one takes is the person that one has the strained relationship with. They call this the enemy or the hostile person. Okay, with each of these persons, one goes through them, running through this formula, may so-and-so be well, may they be happy, or continuing, may they be healthy, may they be peaceful, may all their good undertakings be fulfilled. And as one is going through, at the beginning it's like a mechanical process. One is just running one's mind through the formula in relation to these people. But as one goes through it, one is making the effort to consider this person as another human being and to get a sense, I call this a sense of the inner subjectivity of that person. To experience that person as a human being like yourself who also wants to be well and happy. And so as one is going through, at points suddenly the feeling of metta or loving kindness will arise. It's a little bit like trying to light a fire, not by using matches or lighter, but in the old-fashioned way, using these kindling sticks, rubbing them together until one gets a spark. This is something I've never done, I've just heard about it. Growing up, the time when we had matches. Okay, so one uses the kindling stick. As one is rubbing the two sticks together, the sticks get warmer and warmer till they become hot enough for a spark to arise. And one applies that spark to fuel, and a small fire will light, and then one puts material on that small fire, paper, leaves, and so on, till the fire becomes bigger and bigger. Then one could put sticks on the fire, and as the sticks catch fire, then one could put coals or logs on the fire, and then one has a big fire. So this is the process of developing loving kindness. First, it's like rubbing the kindling sticks together. One doesn't see any spark, and one wonders, how can one ever get a fire from this? But at times, the sticks give up a spark that is like, just very briefly, that feeling of loving kindness will arise. Then one takes that feeling of loving kindness, through repeated practice, one develops it, strengthens it, reinforces it, until it becomes something very powerful and very strong. And then one can extend this loving kindness equally to all of these people, all the people in the different groups, representing the different groups, wishing them to be well and happy. Then one can extend it broadly, universally, to the whole world. Okay, that very briefly is the development of loving kindness. For the thoughts that arise from delusion, drowsiness, restlessness, and remorse, doubt. I think if you go back, I won't go into an explanation of them now, but if you go back and consult the table that I gave out last time on the 5 hindrances, you'll find methods explained there. So I want to go on and complete the sutta. Okay, when he gives attention to some other object connected with what is wholesome, then those unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion are abandoned and subside, and then the mind becomes steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. Then the text gives a simile for this. It's just like a carpenter, if he is working on some object, like a desk or a cabinet, and there might be a coarse peg in there and he wants to replace it. It might be a decaying peg that he wants to repair, and so he'll take a fine peg and use it to knock out the coarse peg, and then he can take another peg, a larger peg, and put it in. Okay, so this is like using one type of thought, one meditation object, to overcome the unwholesome thought. Okay, the text continues that while one is giving attention to some other sign connected with what is wholesome, there still might arise these unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion. Then one should examine the danger in these thoughts, the misery in these thoughts. So then one reflects, these thoughts are unwholesome, these thoughts are reprehensible, these thoughts result in suffering. So this is bringing to mind the danger in the thoughts. And when one examines the danger in these thoughts, then these unwholesome thoughts are abandoned and the mind becomes unified. Okay, then the text uses a rather, we call it a startling simile to illustrate this. Like we have here a young man or young woman who's fond of ornaments, they like to beautify themselves, and then somebody would hang the carcass of a snake or a dog or even part of a human being around their neck. How this would happen, I can't imagine how that might happen. But if this were to happen, maybe some madman would do this, then one would be horrified, humiliated, and disgusted. And one would want to abandon, get rid of that carcass immediately. And so this is the way one might be horrified by perceiving the danger in those thoughts, and then one abandons those thoughts. Okay, coming to the third method, if examining the danger in the thoughts doesn't work, and these unwholesome thoughts still arise, then one should try to forget those thoughts and still not give attention to them. The text uses the expression actually, one is unmindful of those thoughts and doesn't give attention to them. This seems to be the only place, the only context in the sutras where the Buddha actually extols non-mindfulness rather than mindfulness. In my opinion, my humble opinion, Buddha, please excuse me, this should actually be the first method that is used. That is, as one is practicing, when the unwholesome thoughts start to arise, then one doesn't immediately switch over to some other meditation subject opposed to those unwholesome thoughts, but one tries to forget these thoughts. One is mindful of them when they arise, one recognizes them, but one just briefly notes them, disturbing thoughts, maybe angry thoughts, sensual thoughts, just briefly notes it, and just drops it, and brings the mind back to the primary object. Then, if that method doesn't work, then one goes to the method of using the direct antidote. Okay, then there's the simile given to illustrate this method. It's just as a man with good eyesight, if something comes into his field of vision, and he doesn't want the sudden forms and he doesn't want to see them, what one does is just shut the eyes or turns away. Maybe if one is watching some vampire movie, and then the vampire comes up to the heroine, and he's about to bite into her neck to suck her blood. One doesn't want to see it. When it's in the movie theater, one shuts one's eyes, or turns the head away so one doesn't see the vampire attack the heroine. Usually one wants to see that, so one will open the eyes lightly. Okay, so this is the third method. The fourth method, this is the most interesting one. Okay, if there still arise the evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, hatred, and delusion, the way this is translated here, then one should give attention to stilling or quieting down the thought formations of those thoughts. I will put the Pali for this on the board. This is easier to explain from the original expression. Okay, the word vitakka means thoughts. All of our thoughts are subsumed under this word vitakka. Then the word sankhara, here I would understand it to mean the process of the formation of thoughts. And then the word santana has the meaning of settling down, quieting down, or stilling. In this expression that we have in each of the passages, what they're abandoning, his mind becomes steadied internally, composed. This word composed is actually the verb that's related to this noun stilling. Santitati. Okay, so the way this is practiced is it's rather obscure in the original, but it's best understood by taking the simile. So before I explain it, let's just go directly to the simile. We have the case of a man who's walking fast, then he reflects, why am I walking fast? Let me walk slowly. So then he starts to walk slowly. Then he asks himself, why am I walking slowly? What if I just stand still? Then he asks, why am I standing still? Let me sit down. Then when he's sitting, he reflects, why am I sitting? Let me lie down. In other words, he's quieting his body down, stilling the body by changing from each grosser posture to one which is subtler, more comfortable. And so, if we apply this to the development of the mind, it would seem to me that as one is thinking these disturbing thoughts, one simply steps back and observes these thoughts from what we call a distance, so that one detaches. It seems to be creating a kind of split in the mind between what I would call the observing portion and the observed. And so one just watches and observes these thoughts flowing through the mind, and then one raises the question, why am I thinking these thoughts? Let me just still them. And then, because the mind has already developed some degree of power through the separation of the observer and the observed, just by making this decree, this mental decision, then one gives up those strong, unwholesome thoughts. When one does this, still subtler, unwholesome thoughts can arise, but again one just observes them and lets them settle down. And then still subtler, unwholesome thoughts can arise, and one goes on observing them and lets them settle down and subside. And so as one is doing this, through simply stepping back mentally and observing the process of thought, one is able to bring these thoughts, one is able to cut, I would say, to cut down to subtler and subtler levels of the mental process until one could bring the mind to the state of complete internal steadiness, composure, unity, and concentration. But there's still a case where this doesn't work, and then we come to the fifth method. Here, there still arise unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion. Okay, when all of the other methods have been exhausted, then the Buddha recommends this very strong and forceful method. Sometimes this is necessary, so the Buddha doesn't exclude this from his arsenal of techniques. So then with his teeth clenched, the tongue pressed against the roof of the mouth, one beats down, constrains, and crushes mind with mind. And then in this way the mind becomes quiet and still. Then the simile, the Buddha compares this, it's a forceful simile. It's like a strong man might seize a weak man and then beat him down to the ground and crush him down. And so it's in this way that this meditating monk crushes the mind, the disturbing mind, beats it down and brings it to a state of stillness. Okay, then the concluding paragraph, the Buddha says, or the text says, when the monk is giving attention to some sign and so on. He just repeats, ties together all the 5 methods that he's mentioned. And then at the end, he says, this is on page 278, top of 278, this monk is then called a master of the courses of thought. He will think whatever thought he wishes to think, and he will not think any thought that he does not wish to think. And then the text adds, he has severed craving, flung off the fetters, and with the complete penetration of conceit, he has made an end of suffering. This sentence had always been something of a puzzle for me coming here. I can't say always, but it has been a puzzle for me coming here, because the sutta doesn't discuss anything relating to the development of insight. Suddenly it just at the end, it introduces this one sentence which describes this monk who's mastered the development of the mind as an arhat, one completely liberated. And yet all that's been described are methods for attaining samadhi, concentration. But then I checked the Chinese Agama counterpart to the sutta, and I found that sentence is not there. The Chinese counterpart sutta ends with the assertion that the monk can think any thought he wants to think and won't think any thought he doesn't want to think. Nothing about cutting off craving and eliminating the fetters. And so it seems that in the process of oral transmission, somehow this sentence, some transmitter within the Pali school added that sentence, and it got preserved and transmitted down through the generations. But I have to say it's a mistake. Okay, I think we will stop here. I'll ask now if there are any questions. Any questions based on this text or the previous one? Yes, please.
One thing you mentioned that do I need the mic?
I can hear you clearly. I think everybody else can.
Okay. The antidote to desire for success and material wealth is death. It is meditation on death.
I say it's helpful for that, yeah.
It's helpful for that, right. And what if one is doing that and one gets thoughts like, okay, death will come when it will come.
That's what?
If one is meditating on that,
yeah.
and one is trying to use that as an antidote for desire for success, and then one gets the thought that, okay, death will come when it will come, but in the meantime, I should have success. In the meantime, I should do this.
Yeah.
All these get bombarded by the information to speak that you should be successful, otherwise you're a loser. And, what are you doing if you're in Alice at work, let's say, if you're not succeeding at work?
Yeah.
So is there anything more practical antidote? What can we think about success and material wealth that will help us understand that it is not...
Yeah, first I think I think the meditation on death is a very strong and effective antidote. If somebody does this meditation persistently and correctly, successfully, the lure of things like material success, fame, position, let's say material success, fame, position, and so on, will lose their attractiveness, their lure. But let us suppose that one doesn't want to use the meditation on death. One could still use other types of reflections to overcome this, maybe attraction to success, fame, position. Maybe other people have other ideas than I do, but I would think one could consider, say, famous actors, famous businessmen, wealthy millionaires. We hear about them going to psychologists, psychiatrists, living on, some of them have become drug addicts or addicted to medication. I remember in one book the Dalai Lama said that he noticed that when he's invited to stay in homes of people in the West. It's usually wealthy people who invite him to stay. And when he goes to the bathroom, he sometimes takes a look at their cabinet where they keep the medication. And he sees almost invariably that there's like tranquilizer here, stimulant here. So along with success comes these mental disturbances.
You know, I've been grappling with some of that too, but what I realized is I had to do, I was 88 years ago, broke up with my ex-wife, and I was one of the monks in this monastery said, you know, work on loving kindness and meditation for loving kindness. And I wasn't sure what that meant. I've been practicing Buddhism for about 4 or 5 years at that point. And I think there's a combination of a lot of different Buddhist teachings.
Yeah.
Clinging, praising, ego.
Yeah.
And if you don't have some of the basic blocking, the stones to some of the building blocks, Buddhism and principles and some time and practice, then you could go about and doing this meditation on death and loving kindness, death meditation to overcome success and desire to be rich. But it can almost not take too well because the other. Because I have friends who just can't get beyond that. Like I was able to forgive my ex-wife. I was able to be very nice and loving towards her. And it wasn't easy for me, but I had some ideas and had some good teachings already at that point.
One thing I would add to this discussion is, it relates to what I said, but one can reflect that people who achieve this high level of position, material success, often simply they're not very happy. So we have to consider what is the real causes of happiness, the basis of happiness. And it doesn't mean that if you're working at a job that you neglect your job and you become negligent. You still work diligently, punctually, punctiliously, intent on fulfilling all of the requirements of your position. Still, you can work to achieve success and to be rewarded by your employer for your good performance, or if you have your own business, you could work to expand your business to make it successful. But you're doing so not with the idea of just advancing your ego, but you could be doing this as a kind of exercise in developing your capacity for energetic work. And then with the success that you achieve, say you achieve wealth, then you use this wealth to to spread it around in order to benefit others, to practice generosity, to be helpful to others. And then you find that it's the giving that brings the happiness, not the wealth and the position itself.
I think the Bodhi drill for fire is such a good example. I had to do that once.
The what drill?
The Bodhi drill, rubbing, you take a rod and you rub it into another piece of wood.
Yeah.
And you have to spin until you get smoke. And then you get exhausted. And then you start over again. You might get smoke again on just the heat. And then eventually you get a coal of fire. And then if you work really, really, really hard, that coal will become a flame. Or if you use a flame, it gets a spark. If you try that in the summer when you have no need for it, you will give up. It is so rigorously hard. And the one time I got it to work, I was working with friends, and each person would take the stick and rub down, and it was November in the Appalachians, and we used fire. And so I think of loving kindness as when we need karma, when we finally understand our actions, or we begin to get that understanding of volitional intent, then the need for loving kindness and to really develop it becomes strong enough to stick with it. Maybe. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I used that same simile just when I was talking before.
Yeah, that's why I loved it. I thought
it's just rubbing the sticks together.
And I guess before the realization of actions have consequences, like the summertime, one will not fulfill the road drill. In the summer, there's no need. You feel comfortable.
Yeah. Yes, please.
I have a question about loving kindness.
Yeah.
So you said in loving kindness, you think about just one person of different groups.
Right, yeah.
Not as general, opposed to suppose you were thinking about friends.
Yeah.
You just think one friend or as all the friends?
When it is just one person, this is if one wants to develop the intensive meditation on loving kindness. One chooses just one person because one wants to get the sense of this person as what I would call a real human being, to get a sense of what I call the subjectivity of that person. That person as being a subject like oneself, having a mind like oneself, somebody who wants to live, not to die, who wants to be well and happy. And if one takes a group, then one just gets a kind of mental image of the group, but it's harder to get into the particular mind of any person in the group. But this is when one is practicing at the beginning to develop loving kindness. But after one succeeds in developing loving kindness to some extent, then one could take what one does is to take different representatives of the group. So one is changing the people in the group. And then after some time, then one could take the whole groups themselves. But at the outset, one takes one person.
Again, a thought and a question. The whole meditation on sensual pleasure and going through all the stages and steps of the body parts to desensitize one. I mean, for a lay person, let's say, and you're in a committed relationship, and you don't want to be sensual towards all the people, everybody walking around. This is true, because then that is a very big section on meditation and practice. But that if you use this method and you're with somebody, you could become repulsed to them in some way. That's A, the question. Number two is, to me, there's another, besides just the look and the body and the heart, there's the essence of who they are as a person that I'm in love with. So there seems to be some contradiction.
First, I think one has to understand this method. There are 2 points here. One is as, I would call it a somewhat artificial strategy, or maybe a tactic for dealing with the problem of sensual desire. Okay, and then to deal with the other point, that basically it's taught to monastic persons, since the foundation of their religious life is the renunciation of sensual pleasures. But though one renounces sensual relationships, but sensual desire, sensual thoughts come up. And so in order to continue in the monastic life, one has to deal with sensual desire. And so the meditation on the parts of the body is taught, originally it's taught specifically for monastic people. But as I said, in Buddhist countries, lay people also practice it, even though they might be in a committed relationship. But from time to time, they also find it beneficial to step back from their sensual involvement and just look at the nature of sensual desire. And then that meditation helps them. But if one is in a relationship with a partner who's not a practicing Buddhist, one has to be a little cautious how one uses it. Otherwise, it can strain the relationship. Okay, that deals with the first point that you made. In relation to the second point, I say too, it's something of an artificial technique, artificial strategy, in that one is just focusing on a human being from a particular point of view and for a particular purpose. That is, focusing on the human being. First one is taking the human being just as a body, and then just focusing on the body in a particular way for the purpose of overcoming the sensual craving. But of course, when one relates to human beings on a day-to-day basis, one has to relate to them as full human beings, not just as impure bodies which are putting out different types of unattractive fluids.
Well, that's why it seems a little tricky to me in general, because, like you say, it's a tool, but then you're hooked into the person on a different level. If you're actually being present and mindful with them. It's a very tricky thing.
One has to use this meditation, I would say, cautiously and for a particular purpose. Okay, well, I'll take one more question.
Okay, this is also about desire. I find that food is an even bigger desire than lust. And one thing that's admirable in your tradition, right from the get-go, this is unhealthy men and women, eat it once a day or not after noon.
It's teaching what?
Monastics learn not to eat after noon. And we also know today how much food wreaks havoc on communities to supply food, and we know medicinally, eating once every 20 hours has tremendous benefits to help them protect from either chemotherapy for tumor reduction. How is it that they train? How is it that you're training? What is the meditation that teaches a person to go through 20 hours? It's an amazing urge that overwhelms us. Want to consume it. 3 hours.
Within my tradition, like there's one takes the precept as ordination not to eat after midday. I didn't find this too difficult to observe because I wasn't, even as a layperson, I was not so much obsessed with the taste of foods, just trying different foods. So I think with some people that come, when they're trying to observe this, the mind, especially when they're doing the meditation, then the mind starts running through all the different types of foods that they might enjoy. I remember some person said that when doing his meditation, he was thinking, tracking down all of the French restaurants in which he's ever eaten, all of the Chinese restaurants, all of the Spanish restaurants. So it's just a practice that one becomes accustomed to. But there is a particular practice which is taught, a meditation practice, which is taught for overcoming obsession with the taste of food. It's called Ahara Patikula Sanya, which means the perception or the idea of the repulsiveness of food. So when one does this meditation, one reflects on, one takes the food, it looks maybe very pretty, it's fancy, cooked in a fancy way. One takes it, one is chewing it, one reflects, what is the food like now when I'm chewing it? If I were to take this food, spit it out onto a plate, and then somebody were to say, eat it again, it's just coming from your mouth, it hasn't touched anything else. Would you eat it? No.
That's what the birds do.
Okay, so then one reflects, one swallows the food, it goes down into the stomach, what happens to it in the stomach, it gets acted upon by different digestive fluids, then the food goes down into the intestines, and then it's acted upon by still other fluids. Then what is the end product of the food but excrement that comes from the food? Okay, so when one reflects in this way, then the craving for enjoying the taste of the food goes. Another method, a simpler method that I've actually found is useful, this works best when one is doing like an intensive meditation course, is that when one is eating, one simply focuses on the act of eating, the process of chewing the food, not focusing on the taste, but just on the food in the mouth, each bite as one is chewing. And when that happens, then one doesn't have any interest in the taste. Or even if the taste comes up, what's interesting is that the craving for the taste only occurs if this is at the micro mental level, when one is adverting to the taste occasionally. But if one makes the taste of the food the object of one's attention and sustains the attention on the taste, the most delicious food becomes extremely bland, tasteless. It's an interesting phenomenon.
And later in the day, when you're trying to work and the self-pity voice ringing, or one thinks, I can't concentrate because there's not enough. And in fact, you are concentrating very well. You're just concentrating on what you're missing instead of once concentrating on food hunger. Concentrating is very strong, but once telling myself, I can't, I'm so hungry. The technique at this point is one of these 5 sign options is just, like you said, take note of where the mind is, and then back.
But one finds I mean, after one observes this practice for a little while, one becomes accustomed to it, and the body could sustain itself quite well on, it could be one meal, but most monastics take 2 meals, a breakfast and a lunch. Okay, I think we'll have to stop now, and I will go for the lunch now. Anybody else wants, they can go also. And then we can come back here. 12 o'clock is a little... Did you have? No. Okay, we'll come back and then continue maybe as much as we can up to about 12:30. Or maybe we come back 12:15 and continue to about 12:40 or so. Okay, let us end by the sharing of the notes. Akasata Chabumata Devanada Mahedika Punyantam Anumodita Hiran Rakantu Sasana Akasata Chabumata Devanada Mahedika Punyantam Anumodita Hiran Rakantu Desana Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahedika Punyantam Anumoditva Siram Ratantu Mamparam Etavatata Amhehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Deva Anumodantu Sabbe Bhutanumodantu Sabbe Satanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Baba Rupadaya Babichi Hetato Hetantare Satakayupapanna Rupya Rupisha Asanya Sannino Dukha Pamutantu Pusantu Nibutin